Nearly half a century ago, a single mother in Ridgefield, Connecticut, stepped out of her house into the cold night to take out the trash and never returned. Her left slipper lay abandoned on the doorstep, the trash bag torn open, the back door ajar, and silence enveloped the house where her 12-year-old son waited for his mother in desperation. Police searched everywhere but found no trace, leaving only rumors, suspicious glances, and a disappearance that haunted the entire town for decades. Then, more than 40 years later, when a crew of workers accidentally unearthed something strange at an old landfill, the long-buried secret began to unravel, piece by piece, cold and undeniable. Before we follow this nearly half-century-long journey for justice together, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next haunting true crime stories. Ridgefield, Connecticut, October 1979. A chilly autumn night, filled with the scent of decaying leaves and dew settling on the roofs of old houses. This small town in the northeast still maintained its slow pace of life, Branchville Road immersed in sparse golden streetlights, houses separated by tall maple trees shedding leaves. In house number 143, the kitchen light flickered dimly, where Evelyn Eve Marston, 33 years old, a single mother, was cleaning up after dinner with her 12-year-old son Jamie. They had lived peacefully for many years, a simple life amid a friendly small community. Eve worked at the town library, while Jamie attended middle school, a good quiet boy, very attached to his mother. That evening, Eve looked tired after a long workday. She turned off the radio, draped a thin sweater over her shoulders, and told her son, "Mom's going out back to take out the trash, then I'll be right back." Jamie just nodded slightly, bending down to his unfinished homework. The back door closed, the latch clicking softly, followed by footsteps and the crunching sound of the trash bag dragging on the gravel path. A brief moment, seemingly ordinary, was the last time Jamie heard his mother's voice. The clock on the wall ticked past 9. A few minutes passed, then 10. Then half an hour. The night wind slipped through the door crack, carrying the smell of damp grass and the first chill of the season. Jamie began to feel uneasy. He softly called, "Mom," but only the hum of the refrigerator responded. He went to the back door, saw it ajar, swinging in the wind. Outside, the trash bag was torn open, cans and scraps of paper scattered across the steps. One of his mother's slippers lay abandoned right next to the overturned trash can. Everything was eerily silent. Jamie felt his throat dry, his heart pounding. He stood frozen for a few seconds, then turned back into the house, picked up the phone, looked at the most recent contact, but didn't know what to say. In that moment, the wind hitting the glass made him jump, and he decided to run to the neighbor's house, where Mrs. Dolores Dolan lived alone. He pounded on the door, calling hoarsely through tears. When Mrs. Dolan opened the door and saw Jamie's pale face, she knew something was wrong. She quickly threw on a sweater, grabbed a flashlight, and followed the boy to the Marston backyard. The flashlight beam swept through the darkness, illuminating the slipper, the patchy damp earth, then stopping at a faint black streak like a small tire track imprinted on the wet pavement. The air was thick, only the incessant chirping of crickets and the cold mist cutting into the skin. Mrs. Dolan stood still for a moment, then turned back into the house, her hand trembling as she picked up the phone receiver. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke to the Ridgefield police dispatcher. "We need someone here right away. Something very strange is happening on Branchville Road." And in that silent night, the wind rustling through the trees and the dim stars above, no one in the town knew that this night would mark the beginning of the most mysterious disappearance Ridgefield had ever witnessed. About 20 minutes after Mrs. Dolan's call was received, 2 Ridgefield police cruisers arrived on the pitch-black Branchville Road. Blue and red lights reflected off the dew-wet pavement, radio chatter and engine noise echoing through the silent night. On-duty officer Mark Hutchins was the first to step out, quickly securing the area around the Marston family's small wooden house with his partner. Jamie had been taken to the neighbors by Mrs. Dolan, huddled under a thin blanket, his eyes wide with lingering terror. The house was still lit, the back door still open, cold wind blowing and carrying the damp smell of earth and garbage. Hutchins shone his flashlight around the porch, noting every detail: the left slipper askew on the step, the burst trash bag, wet scraps of paper stuck to the brick floor. A faint long streak trailed from the porch right up to the fence. Crouching down, he touched the soft dirt mark with his gloved hand. Tire tracks, small size. His partner quickly measured and estimated, concluding it could belong to a commercial van. Size similar to a late 1970s Ford Econoline E-Series. A common vehicle in the area for electricians, mechanics, or small deliveries. No signs of a struggle inside the house, belongings tidy, cash still in the wallet, Eve's rings and jewelry intact in the bedroom. Her sedan was parked peacefully in the driveway, doors locked, keys on the hook. Everything suggested she had just stepped out for a few minutes and vanished into the darkness. In the backyard, the crime scene tech team strung up tape to limit the search area. Under high-powered lights, every inch was meticulously combed. A small red fabric fiber was found near the steps, caught in a brick crevice. Police collected it with steel tweezers, placing it in a sealed bag. Farther out, under the fence, they discovered a small depression in the soil, like something heavy had fallen, or someone had stood waiting in the shadows. Everything was photographed, positions marked on the scene diagram. Officer Hutchins entered the house again, checking the windows. None had been jimmied. The front door was locked from inside, the back door swung outward, the very one Eve had gone through. That led him to believe the victim had gone out voluntarily, not forced from inside the house. In the kitchen, the clock was stopped at 9:18, likely jammed by a power flicker. On the table sat a half-drunk cup of tea, steam long gone cold. Hutchins noted in his log, last domestic activity approximately between 9 o'clock, 9:15 p.m. Another group of officers went door to door in the neighborhood. Most residents were asleep. However, two witnesses living near the Branchville Road intersection reported hearing strange noises around just after 9 p.m. One described a metallic clatter or a trash can lid slamming hard, followed by a short engine startup, then silence. The other remembered more clearly. That vehicle was small, not a truck, sounded like a van or delivery truck. No one saw a person or vehicle. Those statements matched the time frame Jamie said his mother went out. When the tech team pulled back after nearly 3 hours of combing, they had collected a total of 4 items: the red fiber, the tire tracks, a piece of black plastic possibly from a vehicle bumper, and the left slipper. All were sealed and packaged, sent to the state lab in Hartford. Police also noted no clear unfamiliar footprints. The ground had been blurred by wind and dew. Around 2 a.m., after finishing the report, Officer Hutchins stood silently looking at the backyard flooded with flashlight beams. Everything was so quiet that the scratch of his pen on the notepad was audible. He glanced back at the small house with the living room light still on, the curtain gently swaying, then said softly to his partner, "Nothing taken, no signs of break-in, but she vanished right here in the middle of this." The assistant nodded, noting the case identifier on the report: missing person, suspicious circumstances. Before leaving, Hutchins turned back to look at Mrs. Dolores Dolan comforting young Jamie in the house next door. The boy was still clutching his stuffed bear tightly, his eyes staring blankly toward his mother's silent home. Outside, the fog had thickened, draping the trees like a thin veil. No one knew that those small tire tracks imprinted on the wet ground would be the first, and only, clue leading them into a journey spanning nearly half a century to uncover what had really happened on Branchville Road that night. The next morning, hazy sunlight filtered through the maple trees on Branchville Street, as Ridgefield police began gathering information on Evelyn. Eve Marston's life and relationships. She was 33, had worked at the Ridgefield Public Library for over 6 years. Colleagues described Eve as kind, dedicated, bookish, and devoted most of her time to her son. She lived quietly, with little socializing outside work, no habit of going out in the evenings. The mother and son Jamie's life revolved around work, school and the small house at 143 Branchville. No one imagined someone like her could vanish without a trace. According to records, Eve had divorced her husband, Michael Marston, now living in New Haven. The marriage had ended quietly, no disputes, just the two drifting apart. Michael was an electrical engineer, no criminal record, described as reserved but somewhat controlling. He still kept in touch with his son, often picking up Jamie for weekends. After the divorce, Eve got custody, moved to Ridgefield for a fresh start. She worked hard, saving every penny to put her son through school. To neighbors, Eve was polite, likable, never raising her voice. Early in 1979, she met Daniel Dan Mercer, 25, a mechanic at Route 7 Auto Center. Mercer had fixed Eve's old Plymouth, and afterward they started seeing each other. He was young, lively, seemed attentive to her, but many noted Mercer was hot-tempered, quick to frustration when opposed. Police records showed he'd been cited for a minor disturbance at a bar 2 years prior. Still, Mercer was seen as charismatic, and to Eve, the relationship brought the attention she'd long missed. Police interviewed Eve's colleagues at the library. They said she'd seemed anxious lately. A friend recounted Eve saying, "Dan's good, but sometimes I don't know what he's thinking." Detective Hutchins noted that as relationship showing signs of strain. Mrs. Dolores Dolan, the neighbor, also mentioned seeing a beige van parked in front of Eve's yard one evening in mid-September. The driver was a young man, brown hair, tall build, details matching Mercer's description. The investigative team reviewed Eve's assets and personal documents. No debts, no disputes, no work conflicts. On her desk at the library was an unfinished novel. At home, a birthday card unsent to Jamie. All pointed to no intention of leaving. These facts led police to rule out theories of Eve running away or a robbery. On October 21, Hutchins listed the first 3 names on the interview roster: Michael Marston, Daniel Mercer and Dolores Dolan. Michael was called to the New Haven police station that same day. He stated the last time he spoke to Eve was the previous week by phone, and had an alibi for the night she disappeared. Multiple co-workers confirmed he was on the evening shift at the plant. Records temporarily cleared Michael. Daniel Mercer didn't show up for work the next morning, calling in sick. His garage boss said he'd seemed stressed the last few days, saying he needed a couple days off to handle personal matters. This information immediately caught Hutchins' attention. He noted in the report, "Boyfriend, showing unusual behavior post-disappearance." That afternoon, police contacted Mercer to bring him into the Ridgefield station. Another team returned to the Marston area to recheck the tire tracks, sending samples for comparison with local vehicle registrations. Preliminary results showed the tread pattern matched a 1978 Ford Econoline, the exact model owned by Daniel Mercer. Before ending his shift, Hutchins compiled the first report on persons of interest. In the margin of the page, he wrote briefly, 3 people who knew the victim well. One of them had motive, opportunity and means. At the bottom of the list, the name Daniel Mercer was underlined twice. 2 days after Eve Marston's disappearance, in the morning, the Ridgefield police expanded the search efforts. A temporary command center was set up in the parking lot near the town library, where Eve had worked. More than 30 police officers and volunteers participated, divided into teams combing the area around Pierrepont State Park Forest, the banks of the Norwalk River, and nearby residential neighborhoods. News of the disappearance spread throughout the town, and everyone was stunned to hear that the gentle woman, a familiar face at the library, had vanished right from her own home. 2 bloodhounds from the Connecticut State Police were brought in. They were given a sample of Eve's sweater to sniff, and then began tracking the scent. The path led out the back of the house, around the trash cans, then extended along the western fence. Near the dirt road connecting to Route 7, both dogs stopped and barked incessantly. Examining the scene, the officers discovered a drag mark nearly 2 meters long and faint impressions of small tire tracks on the damp ground. There was no blood, hair or biological evidence, just a few scratches on the ground, indicating that something heavy had been moved. The area was cordoned off and photographed meticulously. The technical team created a map noting the locations of the traces. According to the initial hypothesis, Eve may have been dragged or carried from the backyard to the dirt road, where a vehicle was waiting. This route was quite secluded, with little light, flanked by dense trees on both sides, making it very hard to detect at night. The choice of location suggested the perpetrator might be familiar with the area. While the main group combed Pierrepont Forest, another team was assigned to follow the Norwalk River along the edge of the park. They used ropes and small boats to search the riverbed, but found nothing except trash and rotten branches. Volunteers distributed flyers with Eve's photo to every household in the area, describing her as wearing a dark green sweater, light khaki pants, brown hair and a slender build. Many residents voluntarily joined the search until late evening. Hutchins requested the investigative team compile a list of all beige or light brown vans registered in Ridgefield over the past 2 years, especially late 1970s Ford Econoline models, matching the tire tracks obtained. The preliminary list had 16 vehicles, including one owned by Daniel Mercer. This result was entered into the temporary log and sent back to headquarters for analysis. On the third day, the search team expanded 3 miles further north. Police used a helicopter flying low along Route 7 and the surrounding forests. No body, no signs of a struggle, no additional evidence. The report sent to Hartford confirmed, no blood traces in the soil samples, on the slippers or in the trash bag, only a red fiber of undetermined origin. Under the microscope, the fiber was identified as polyester, the type commonly used in work protective clothing, matching the fabric of the jacket Mercer often wore at the garage. That afternoon, Hutchins met with the team at the command center. On the map, he circled 3 points: the trash can location, the drag mark, and where the tire tracks stopped at the edge of Route 7. The entire path is only about 80 meters long, he said. If Eve was taken away by vehicle, the perpetrator had to be very quick and know this area well. He requested nearby gas stations to review fuel receipts from the night of the disappearance, but since there were no cameras, all efforts were in vain. The search efforts continued for another 2 days with no results. The K-9 team lost the scent at the Route 7 intersection heading toward Danbury. Volunteer groups returned to check every vacant lot and abandoned house, but all were empty. The town mayor came to the scene to encourage the forces, and simultaneously suggested that the state police continue the investigation in a criminal direction. Hutchins ended the weekend final report with a brief assessment: no signs of voluntary departure, no evidence of attack inside the home. Possible that the victim was subdued outside and transported by a small vehicle. Under the notes section, he underlined 3 words: van, route, 7, Mercer. That night, as the team finally withdrew from the forest, thick fog covered the fields. The faint tire tracks imprinted on the wet ground gradually disappeared under the searchers' footsteps. After 4 days of continuous combing, Ridgefield still had not found any trace of Eve Marston, only the feeling that someone had taken her away from that house quickly, silently, and with calculation. On the afternoon of the 5th day after Eve Marston's disappearance, the search was temporarily paused so the police could focus on investigating related personnel. On Detective Mark Hutchins's desk at Ridgefield headquarters, 3 names were circled in red: Michael Marston, ex-husband, Daniel Mercer, current boyfriend, and Dolores Dolan, neighboring witness. Among them, Michael was prioritized for the first interrogation because of past child custody disputes and having the clearest family motive. On October 23, 1979, Hutchins and a state investigator traveled to New Haven, where Michael was working at an electrical equipment factory. They met him in the technical office, a man in his 30s, tall, with neatly combed hair, and a weary demeanor. Upon hearing about Eve's disappearance, Michael appeared stunned. He said he had received a call from Ridgefield the morning before, but still didn't understand what had happened. Throughout the interview, Michael remained cooperative, occasionally showing confusion. He recounted that on the evening Eve disappeared, he was at the Yale Conference Center Hotel, attending a 2-day technical seminar, with about 20 other participants. The police quickly verified this alibi. The attendee list, room receipts, and colleague confirmations all matched. Hutchins asked further about their recent relationship. Michael said they had been divorced for 3 years, still kept in touch for visiting their son, and had no further disputes. "She's a good mother," he said, his voice slow. "I can't believe this happened." When asked about Eve's new boyfriend, Michael replied that he had heard Jamie mention a guy named Dan, some mechanic, but had never met him in person. He said he didn't care about his ex-wife's romantic life. After more than an hour, Hutchins concluded Michael showed no signs of deception. The alibi evidence was strong enough to eliminate him from the main suspect list. Returning to Ridgefield, Hutchins drafted the report. Marston, alibi confirmed. No criminal record, no motive or opportunity. This note was underlined twice. The investigative team officially shifted focus to the second person, Daniel Mercer. Mercer, 25 years old, lived alone in a rented apartment near Route 7. He didn't come to the garage for 2 days after the disappearance, calling in sick by phone. When the police arrived, Mercer appeared calm but avoided eye contact. He said he knew Eve because he fixed her car a few times, after which they got close, but denied any conflicts. When asked about the night she disappeared, Mercer claimed he was home watching TV, alone, with no witnesses. Hutchins noted briefly, alibi weak. The police requested Mercer allow them to inspect his Ford Econoline van, the same model that left tire tracks near the scene. Mercer agreed but seemed annoyed. During the vehicle search, they discovered the rear floor had been freshly washed, still smelling of cleaner. He explained he had just cleaned it to prepare for delivery to a customer. There was no blood or suspicious items, but the overly thorough cleaning raised suspicions among the investigators. When asked about the scratches on his right hand, Mercer said he slipped with a wrench while working at the garage. With no direct contradicting evidence, the police had to release him after the initial interrogation. At the same time, the Hartford lab sent back the evidence report. The red fiber found in Eve's backyard was identified as industrial polyester, with color and structure matching samples from Breyer workwear protective jackets, the type of uniform common in local garages. This detail wasn't enough for an indictment, but reinforced suspicions toward Mercer. In that afternoon's internal meeting, Hutchins presented a diagram of relationships, Eve at the center, 3 main branches being Michael, ex-husband cleared, Dan boyfriend, under suspicion, and the surrounding community. No leads yet. He concluded, "We have no signs of break-in, no robbery motive. This wasn't random behavior. Someone knew her well." From that day, Mercer officially became the subject of covert surveillance. Police stationed unmarked patrol cars around his apartment and workplace. They waited for mistakes, for unusual reactions. But Mercer continued his routine movements, not contacting anyone, maintaining a cold demeanor, buried in his garage work. In the October 26 report, Hutchins wrote a short line: primary suspect, Mercer, motive, unclear, continue surveillance. As night fell over Ridgefield, the tire tracks at the scene had been blurred by wind and dew. The official investigation shifted to its most difficult phase. No body, no witnesses, only a young man who was suspiciously calm, the sole thread connecting to Eve Marston's disappearance. 2 days after the initial surveillance, the Ridgefield police decided to invite Daniel Dan Mercer back for a formal interrogation. The session took place in the second-floor investigation room at town headquarters, a small room with just a metal table, 2 facing chairs, and a wall clock ticking monotonously. Mercer arrived on time, wearing a gray-green jacket with the garage logo, calm in demeanor, but with evasive eyes. Officer Mark Hutchins personally led the interrogation. From the first question, Hutchins went straight to the point. "Did you see Eve Marston on the day she disappeared?" Mercer nodded slightly. "Yes. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I stopped by to return some things she had left in the car, a cassette tape and a pair of gloves. I wasn't there long," he affirmed, leaving Eve's house before 4 o'clock, then driving home to rest. "I had dinner alone and watched the game," Mercer said, eyes down on the table. When asked who could confirm this, he replied curtly, "No one. I was alone." Hutchins pressed deeper. "Did you contact Eve after that?" Mercer shook his head, saying their relationship was on pause. She wanted time to think, and he respected that decision. His voice was slow, steady, but his hands on the table showed a long scratch near the thumb joint. When Hutchins asked about it, Mercer said he slipped with a wrench while working in the garage that same morning. The investigator noted in his notebook, "Fresh wound, soft tissue not yet healed, recheck." After the basic questions, Hutchins presented some witness details. He said someone had seen a beige van parked near Eve's house around 9 p.m. on the night she disappeared. "Do you have any explanation for that?" Mercer paused slightly, then said, "It couldn't have been my van. I was home, vehicle parked in the garage. Lots of people have that type of van." His tone was even, but veins on his wrist stood out clearly. The investigative team had prepared photos of the tire tracks obtained at the scene. The tread pattern matched the 1978 Ford Econoline line, the exact model Mercer owned. When the photo was placed on the table, he glanced at it and smirked. "All Fords look the same. You guys are chasing shadows." Hutchins didn't respond, just nodded slightly, then requested Mercer allow another vehicle inspection. He reluctantly agreed. While Mercer waited in the outer room, the technical team searched his van again. The cargo area was unusually clean, floor freshly washed, strong cleaner smell lingering. A rubber mat in the rear compartment had a corner cut off. On the surface, no blood was detected, but a few small fibers were adhering. All were collected, sealed, and sent to the Hartford lab. When asked about the washing, Mercer said, "I wash it every weekend. I work on cars, that's normal." The interrogation lasted nearly 3 hours. Mercer kept a calm tone, almost challenging. He said Eve was a good person, but they were drifting apart, and denied any conflicts. Hutchins noticed that every time Eve's name was mentioned, Mercer looked down, lips pursing longer than usual. "Did you love her?" he asked. Mercer looked up, half smiling. "I'm not a killer, if that's what you're asking." When the session ended, there was no direct evidence strong enough to hold Mercer. It was all statements and coincidental traces. The police had to let him go. Hutchins watched Mercer's figure leave headquarters, walking quickly and straight, without looking back. In the internal report, he wrote, "Mercer cooperative but evasive. Alibi unverifiable. Vehicle unusually clean. No grounds for detention." The next day, preliminary test results from the Hartford lab were sent back. The small fibers taken from Mercer's van floor were red polyester in structure, the same type as the one collected from Eve's backyard. However, due to their tiny size, they couldn't be confirmed as the same sample. Conclusion: possible but inconclusive match. This information bolstered suspicions but lacked legal value. The investigative team continued reviewing Mercer's phone and financial activity. No unusual calls, no out-of-routine spending. He lived alone, no family in Ridgefield, steady job, no signs of flight. Hutchins understood that without additional evidence, the case would soon go into suspended status. A few days later, the covert surveillance order was lifted. The police no longer had legal grounds to follow. Mercer returned to work at the garage, going about his routine as usual, almost defying every gaze. Outside, local media reported no progress in Eve Marston's disappearance, calling on residents to provide information. but no one had any new leads. More than a week later, Hutchins completed the first summary for the Marston missing person file. In the notes section, he wrote, "No body, no witness, no confession. Primary suspect identified but uncharged." He closed the folder, turned off the light, looked out the window where early winter rain pattered on the car roof. The investigation, despite maximum effort, had reached the threshold that police couldn't cross without new evidence. Evelyn Marston's disappearance officially stalled there, only a report left, a few evidence bags, and the name Daniel Mercer lying quietly in the main suspect list. Hutchins still believed he knew something, but that belief wasn't enough to hold that man with clean hands, cold eyes, and mocking smile for even one more minute. 1 week after Dan Mercer's release, the official investigation quieted down. No new leads emerged, no additional witnesses or supplementary evidence appeared. The Ridgefield Police Department, which had been lit up around the clock for the past half-month, now returned to its regular rhythm. On Officer Mark Hutchins' desk, the file labeled Evelyn Marston, Missing Person, was set aside separately, over 200 pages thick, but empty of results. On the morning of November 2, 1979, Hutchins chaired the final internal meeting of the investigative team. 7 detectives sat around the table, each presenting their assigned portions, forensic results, interview reports, financial reviews, and evidence summaries. No one had anything new. The Hartford lab report confirmed the red fiber recovered from Eve's backyard had a polyester structure similar to worker uniforms, but could not prove any connection to Mercer. The hair samples found in the house all belonged to Eve and her son, with no foreign DNA. The tire tracks matched a Ford Econoline type, but lacked sufficient detail to identify a unique vehicle. Each evidence bag was inventoried one last time: the victim's cream-colored left sandal, the torn trash bag, the black plastic fragment, suspected from a rear bumper, the red fiber, and the soil sample containing the tire impressions. All were placed in specialized paper bags, labeled, dated, signed by the collector, then transferred to the Connecticut State Police Evidence Facility storage in Hartford. Each bag bore a warning label, "Do not destroy, pending investigation." After the meeting, Hutchins sat alone in his office, finalizing the summary report. Under the investigation status section, he wrote, "No direct evidence confirming criminal activity, no body, murder weapon, or witnesses, citing the victim after 9 p.m. on October 19, 1979. Likelihood of voluntary departure, low. Likelihood of abduction, insufficient basis to conclude." In the final notes section, he added the line, "Primary suspect, Daniel Mercer, 25, mechanic, no charges filed," then drew 2 underscores. The file was stamped UN Resolved Missing Person Case, case number RM791019. That afternoon, Hutchins and the archivist staff transported the entire evidence into the cold storage vault. The long sealed room was filled with sealed cardboard boxes containing hundreds of unsolved cases. He placed Eve's file box on shelf 5, row 12, next to another missing person case archived since 1976. As the metal door closed, the sound echoed faintly in the empty space. To many, it was just a missing person case without a victim found. To Hutchins, it was his heaviest personal failure. That evening, he returned home, sat in his small study overlooking the backyard. On the desk was still the photo of Eve taken at the library, a gentle smile, kind eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that the woman hadn't left voluntarily, that somewhere around town, there were still undiscovered traces. But the investigative process had halted, no criminal act could be verified, the file had to be temporarily closed. 3 days later, the state prosecutor's office approved the decision to suspend the investigation until new evidence emerged. A brief press release was sent to local media. Ridgefield police continue to seek information related to the disappearance of citizen Evelyn Marston, age 33. The file is temporarily archived pending supplementary evidence. The story appeared on page 3 of the Ridgefield Press on November 6, 1979, with a small headline, "Young Mother Still Hasn't Returned." Beneath the blurry photo of Eve was the caption, "If anyone has information, contact Ridgefield Police." After a few days, the article was replaced by other news. A car accident, an early snowstorm. At police headquarters, the RM791019 file lay dormant in storage. Time passed, dust accumulated thickly on the brown cover, leaving only the faded red lettering, "Missing," unresolved. For Hutchins, the case never truly ended, but in Connecticut's state system, Evelyn Marston was now just a name in the long list of missing persons of unknown cause. The 1980s passed, Ridgefield changed somewhat. New stores sprouted along Route 7, the population grew denser, but in the Connecticut State Storage Facility, the RM791019 file remained in its original spot. Evelyn Marston's disappearance gradually became buried under layers of time's dust. Most of those who had participated in the 1979 investigation had been reassigned or retired. Officer Mark Hutchins, after promotion to Deputy Chief of Detectives, still occasionally mentioned the case in meetings, but no one knew where to start over. No body, no new evidence, no new witnesses. The file was nearly dead. In 1987, when Connecticut established the Cold Case Unit, the Marston case was included in the first review category. The new team, led by Lieutenant Raymond Cook, was tasked with examining disappearances lasting over 10 years. They opened old file boxes, cross-checked protocols, photos, and evidence lists. The RM791019 file consisted of 4 carefully sealed paper bags, the left sandal, the red fiber, the black plastic fragment, and the soil sample with tire impressions. Inside were also a few hair strands and fabric fibers adhering to Eve's clothing collected from her home. Cook noted in the logbook, "Specimens well preserved, suitable for basic biological testing." The problem was that in the late 1980s, DNA analysis technology was still in its infancy, applied only to major cases with fresh samples. For evidence over 8 years old, the chance of successful extraction was nearly zero. The state Hartford lab could only perform traditional blood group testing based on protein markers. Results showed a faint trace of blood type O on one fiber, and the soil sample, a common type comprising nearly half the population. This did nothing to narrow the suspect pool. The report concluded, insufficient basis for comparison, no value for personal identification. During the review, the cold case team attempted to recontact those involved in the 1979 investigation. Some had transferred, a few had passed away. Hutchins, who had left the force by then, agreed to meet Cook again to discuss. In the meeting, he still remembered every detail, the sandal's position, the tire impressions in the soil, Mercer's beige van. "I always thought he knew something," Hutchins said, "but back then we had no way to prove it." He handed Cook his old notebook, which still contained the site sketch he had drawn himself. The cold case team decided to retest the most perishable specimens, the red fiber and hair. They were sent to the State Forensic Institute to assess biological viability. The 1990 report stated that some samples still held potential for DNA extraction if technology advanced further, recommending continued storage in dry, dark conditions at stable temperature. With no advanced analysis methods available, the file was closed again and returned to Hartford storage. In the 1990s, local press occasionally revisited Eve Marston's disappearance in the Cold Cases of Connecticut column, but only in brief lines with blurry photos. State police received a few anonymous tips, most baseless. One claimed to have seen a similar van in New Jersey, another said rumors of Eve moving to Florida with a friend. All were noted and crossed out. Within the cold case unit, the Marston case was still considered a clean file, meaning, no direct evidence flaws, just lacking data to proceed. Occasionally, when similar cases arose, Eve's name was mentioned as a textbook example of pre-DNA investigation limits. In 1996, as genetic identification technology became widespread, Cook petitioned for another review. But priorities then favored cases with clear blood traces. Eve Marston's wasn't on the approved budget list. By the late 1990s, The RM791019 file was labeled with a yellow sticker, "Reviewed. No new evidence." The documents were reshelved on row 12, alongside dozens of other cases. In the storage log, Cook's final note read, "Specimens eligible for DNA testing when technology permits. Do not recommend destruction." Over 2 decades had passed since the night Eve vanished. Ridgefield's old roads were now paved. Pierrepont Woods expanded trails for hikers. But in Hartford's cold storage, the cardboard box marked RM791019 remained untouched, carefully labeled. Inside, the left sandal and red fiber continued to be preserved, like frozen fragments of time, waiting for the day someone, with new technology, would reopen the story that police of that era had to close in helplessness. In May 2024, workers expanding the southern Ridgefield section of Route 7 discovered human bone fragments while grading land that had been an abandoned dump from the late 1970s. The area was about a mile from the residential zone, surrounded by forest and weeds, rarely visited for decades. The bulldozer operator stopped the machine when the blade hit something hard like rock, but upon leaning down to check, he realized it was part of a human skull. The site was immediately cordoned off. Ridgefield Police and the Connecticut State Forensics Unit arrived quickly. Lieutenant Rachel Keene, in charge of the scene, directed the zoning of the land, tarped it over, and began manual excavation. Within hours, they found more bone fragments, pelvic bones, arm bones, and some rusted metal buttons. Notably nearby was a piece of dark green wool fabric, and a small silver necklace engraved with the initials, EM. The engraving instantly reminded Rachel of a name in the database, Evelyn Marston, missing since 1979. The forensics team urgently reported to the Connecticut State Cold Case Unit. A specialist team from Hartford arrived at the site immediately, bringing the RM791019 file archived for over 40 years. The excavation lasted 2 days. Examiners recovered nearly the entire skeleton, buried shallowly less than a meter from the surface. The remains lay on their side, facing east, arms curled near the chest, with no intact clothing beyond a few wool scraps. The skull bore a long fracture, indicating severe trauma while alive. The preliminary report indicated the bones belonged to a woman approximately 5'5" tall, age 30-35, deceased in the late 1970s. Specimens along with evidence including the wool sweater, buttons, silver necklace, and surrounding soil were sealed and transported to the Connecticut Forensic Science Laboratory. En route, no one spoke, but all understood the high likelihood this was the woman the town had sought for nearly half a century. At the lab, forensic pathologist Dr. Carol Nolan personally examined the remains. She concluded the skeleton was relatively well preserved due to burial in dry soil with low groundwater. A femur bone sample and molar were selected for DNA extraction. However, since the 1979 file had never stored the victim's genetic sample, they needed a familial match. Police immediately contacted Jamie Marston, Eve's son, now 57, living in Boston. Upon receiving the call, he was silent for a long time, then said curtly, "I'll cooperate." Jamie's DNA sample was rushed to Hartford. While awaiting results, the investigative team reviewed historical maps of the excavation area. According to town records, the plot had been a temporary dump from 1975 to 1981, then abandoned. Notably, the location was less than a mile from Eve's home, matching the area Daniel Mercer had mentioned in his 45-year-old interrogation, that the South Route 7 dump was a place he had passed through. Back then, police found no body and couldn't link the statement. Now, everything seemed to align in precise detail. 3 days later, carbon isotope dating confirmed the time of death fell within 1978-1980. The forensic report also indicated the likely cause of death was blunt force head trauma, consistent with the skull fracture. The green wool sweater with synthetic fibers was identified as a common type sold in eastern U.S. stores in the late 1970s. The silver necklace engraved EM showed wear indicating long-term use, not a random antique. Lieutenant Keene and Captain Lewis Grant, head of the cold case team, reopened the RM791019 file at the Hartford office. The black and white photo of the old scene, the sandal, tire tracks, red fiber, was placed next to the newly recovered necklace. Grant stared for a long moment, then said, "If this is Eve Marston, this case was never closed." When Jamie's DNA arrived, technicians immediately proceeded with genetic sequencing. The match results were returned within 48 hours. The printed report boiled down to one line: probability of maternally related match, 99.998%. Conclusion: identical lineage confirmed. After 45 years, the remains' identity was confirmed as Evelyn Marston, the victim in the 1979 disappearance. The news was announced internally in a special meeting at Hartford. The entire investigative team stood silent for a few seconds as Grant read the results, before someone softly said, "Finally, we found her." A brief press release was sent to media. Connecticut State Police confirmed the female remains found in the Route 7 area belonged to Evelyn Marston, missing since 1979. The official investigation is formally reopened. The breaking news aired on local TV that evening, rekindling memories thought dormant for 4 decades. In Boston, Jamie Marston declined interviews. In a letter to police, he wrote simply, "Thank you for not forgetting my mother." And at Hartford Storage, where the RM791019 file had been kept, the old evidence bags, red fiber, tire impressions, left sandal, were unsealed once more. For the first time in nearly half a century, Evelyn Marston's disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was officially reclassified, reopened, homicide investigation. The official report from the Connecticut Forensic Science Laboratory was sent to the Cold Case Unit at the end of May 2024. In a small conference room in Hartford, Captain Lewis Grant and Lieutenant Rachel Keene, along with the entire team, awaited the results. When the final line appeared on the screen, the room fell silent. DNA sample from the skeletal remains recovered at Route 7 matches the sample of Jamie Marston. Identity confirmed: Evelyn Marston, born 1946. Match probability, 99.9998%. After 45 years, the disappearance of the single mother from Ridgefield was officially determined to be a homicide. Grant nodded slightly and whispered, "We've found her." But the more notable part was in the appendix. During the cleaning of the silver necklace engraved with EM, technicians discovered traces of another person's skin cells stuck to the clasp. Analysis revealed it was DNA from a male individual. The genetic sequence did not match any Marston family members and had no corresponding record in the state database. The report concluded, Y DNA profile: partial, unique, likely male, non-relative. This result immediately changed the entire direction of the investigation. The evidence indicated that before her death, Eve had direct contact with a man, very likely the perpetrator. The DNA portion was well preserved because the necklace had been in a dry, low-bacteria environment, proving the trace had been there since the time of her disappearance. The next day, file RM791019 was updated with a new status: reclassified, homicide, active cold case investigation. All old evidence was transferred to the Hartford Forensics Lab for reanalysis using next-generation DNA technology. The red fabric fiber, the left shoe, the soil sample with tire tracks. For the first time in nearly half a century, the Evelyn Marston case was no longer in the unsolved missing category, but back on the national priority list. The investigative team quickly reconstructed the entire timeline. On the night of October 19, 1979, Eve disappeared after taking out the trash. No signs of forced entry, property intact, only small tire tracks and a red fabric fiber. At the time, the prime suspect was Daniel Dan Mercer, Eve's boyfriend, a mechanic at Route 7 Auto Center. He owned a beige Ford Econoline van, matching the tire tracks. Mercer had been interrogated, with scratches on his hand and his vehicle unusually clean, but due to lack of a body and evidence, he was released. The file faded into obscurity from there. Now the new evidence, the necklace with male DNA, immediately brought Mercer back to the center of the investigation. Grant requested a current trace on him. Just hours later, administrative data confirmed Daniel Mercer, born 1954, 69 years old, residing in New Haven County, still in the state of Connecticut. No major criminal record, but arrested in 1989 for bar assault and released. Keene looked at the report and said, "He never left the state. If this DNA matches, we'll have answers after 45 years." Grant nodded and issued an urgent order: submit the DNA sequence to the CODIS system. At the same time, request a court order to collect Mercer's biological sample for comparison. While awaiting a response, the digital team digitized the entire 1979 file: crime scene photos, witness statements, van photos, tire tracks, red fabric fiber. Everything was rescanned in high resolution for modern comparison. Old newspaper clippings were pinned to the board, next to a gentle photo of Eve smiling, taken at the Ridgefield Library. On May 28, internal information was announced: the female DNA in the skeletal remains confirmed, the unknown male DNA under analysis. The Evelyn Marston case was officially handed over to the Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit. New file code, CCU 2024-118. News immediately spread to the press. Local stations ran big headlines: Evelyn Marston's remains identified. After 45 years, new DNA reveals male suspect. Residents of Ridgefield, especially the older generation, were stunned. That night of disappearance back then had kept the whole town on edge. Now the story returned with more modern evidence than ever. In the Hartford office, Grant looked at a photo of the silver necklace placed in a glass case. Under the light, the small clasp where the DNA trace lingered gleamed faintly. He said to Keene, "That man might have taken it off her neck before burying her." She replied softly, "Or he helped her put it on, then he ended it all." That evening, the old evidence bags, the red fabric fiber, the left shoe, and the soil sample with tire tracks were removed from storage once more. Under the white lights, the new red lettering on the file cover stood out: Case Reopened, Evidence Under DNA Re-examination. 45 years later, the once silent evidence finally spoke, and in the minds of the investigators, only one name remained circled in red at the center of the data board: Daniel Mercer, the man they believed had been with Evelyn Marston on her final night. Early June 2024 marked the official entry of the Evelyn Marston case into the modern investigation phase. The Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit reopened all original evidence stored from 1979, using touch DNA technology, capable of extracting skin cell traces even after decades. In the Hartford lab, the old sealed bags were opened. The left shoe, the torn trash bag, the red fabric fiber, and a black plastic shard. All were processed in a sterile environment, every surface swabbed to isolate remaining DNA. The initial results stunned the investigative team. Traces of male DNA on the shoe strap and the trash bag mouth matched the partial DNA sample found on Eve's silver EM necklace. The genetic sequence, though not complete, was sufficient to confirm it was the same male individual, who had direct contact with the victim before her body was buried. Parallel to the testing, the technical team digitized all old crime scene photos and used software to reconstruct the tire tracks. Comparison with the national database showed the tread matched the Goodyear Suburbanite 10R15 exactly, standard equipment for the 1978 Ford Econoline, the exact model owned by Daniel Mercer. Vehicle registration records confirmed Mercer sold the van in 1980, just months after the disappearance. These results made suspicions toward Mercer even clearer. The team reviewed the 1979 interrogation transcript. Mercer claimed he was home watching football from 7 p.m. to midnight. But cross-referencing old broadcast schedules, the game he mentioned ended at 9 p.m., coinciding with the time Eve's neighbors heard a vehicle leaving the Branchville area. At the same time, 1979 landline records showed a short call at 9:42 p.m. from Mercer's number to Eve's home. He had previously stated no contact after that afternoon. Clearly the statement was inconsistent. The new evidence was compiled, matching male DNA on the necklace and shoe, tire tracks matching Mercer's Ford Econoline, and timeline discrepancies in his statement. Captain Lewis Grant signed a request to the state prosecutor's office for a warrant to collect the suspect's current DNA sample. Hartford court approved it the same day, finding reasonable grounds for comparison. On June 6, 2 agents arrived at Mercer's home in New Haven County. At 69, he lived alone, still working as an electrical technician. Upon hearing the announcement, Mercer remained calm, saying only, "I answered you back in 1979. However, he agreed to provide a voluntary DNA sample. The sample was sealed and sent directly to Hartford that afternoon. At the lab, the new sample was entered into full sequencing, compared to the male DNA chain from the necklace and old evidence. The technicians acknowledged this as the pivotal moment. If the results matched, the 45-year case would have a clear suspect. While awaiting results, the investigative team continued gathering information on Mercer. A former colleague at Route 7 Auto Center confirmed he left the garage early on the evening of October 19, 1979, saying he had to meet someone. The next morning, Mercer called in sick, reporting a cold. These fragmented memories, pieced together, formed a cohesive picture with the current evidence. That evening, in the cold case conference room, Grant presented the synthesis diagram, evidence, timeline, DNA comparison. Every arrow pointed to one name, Daniel Mercer. He said, "We're reconnecting the thread that 1979 technology couldn't see. Now it's crystal clear." Outside in the hallway, Lieutenant Rachel Keene stood silently, looking at the old photo of Eve pinned to the file board, a young woman with a gentle smile, bright eyes. She whispered, "If the DNA matches, we'll finish the story the whole town left unfinished." And in the Hartford lab, the DNA sequencer ran through the night. On the screen, genetic segments appeared one by one, tiny characters slowly unveiling the truth buried for 45 years. And in that silence, the investigators knew that one matching result would ensure the past could no longer stay quiet. A week after Daniel Mercer's DNA sample was sent to the Hartford lab, the preliminary analysis report was complete. The results showed the male DNA chain recovered from Evelyn Marston's silver necklace and shoe strap matched Mercer's sample almost perfectly, at 21 out of 22, compared genetic loci. However, to achieve absolute evidentiary standards for prosecution, the forensics team recommended an additional step, forensic genetic genealogy analysis, the technology used in many U.S. cold cases. On June 14, 2024, the male DNA data was encrypted and uploaded to the GEDmatch database, a platform allowing biological relative tracing based on millions of voluntary DNA samples. The system took nearly 2 days to process everything. When the results appeared, a list of names emerged on the screen. Individuals with distant blood relations to the source DNA, mostly from Connecticut and Florida. Forensic genetic genealogist Martha Klein, who had assisted on cases like the Golden State Killer, was brought in to participate. She carefully compared each marker, cross-referencing with public genealogy databases. This chain indicates a relationship within 3 to 4 generations, Klein said, pointing to the diagram on the screen. The closest branches carry the Mercer surname, migrated from the north to Florida in the 1950s. From that data, the investigative team began building a reverse family tree. They identified 3 men with the Mercer surname currently living in Florida with genetic matches at 2–3%. After cross-checking ages and origins, Only one family branch matched Daniel Mercer's lineage, born 1954, Ridgefield, Connecticut. Birth and census records confirmed Daniel as the grandson of the same migrant ancestor traced by GED match. By expanding the comparison to over 1,200 genetic markers, the Hartford lab issued a conclusion. The male DNA sample at the scene has a match probability with Daniel Mercer of 1 in 2.3 trillion. The report emphasized that in the entire U.S. population, the chance of two unrelated individuals sharing this genetic chain was virtually zero. Upon receiving the results, Captain Lewis Grant glanced down at the bolded number and whispered, "No doubt left." Lieutenant Rachel Keene, in charge of the file, immediately prepared a summary brief for the state prosecutor. All DNA data, match results, and family tree maps were packaged in an electronic file titled, Genetic Confirmation. Evelyn Marston homicide subject, Daniel Mercer. On the morning of June 17, the investigative team held a closed meeting at Hartford headquarters. On the large screen, the family tree displayed dozens of names spanning 4 generations, all converging on one central point, Daniel Mercer, Ridgefield, Connecticut. Martha Klein presented, "The genetic line from Florida can only pass through one man born in 1954. These DNA samples can't belong to anyone else." Grant was silent for a few seconds, then said, "After 45 years, we finally have the scientific basis to confirm what Hutchins always believed. Mercer is the killer." He instructed Keene to finalize the file for an arrest warrant. The request was submitted to the Connecticut Supreme Court the same day, accompanied by the key evidence, DNA match of 1.2 trillion. Between Mercer and the male sample from the evidence, tire tracks matching the 1978 Ford Econoline registered to Mercer. Inconsistencies in his statement about leaving the garage and the 9:42 p.m. call to Eve's phone number. Matching DNA traces on the victim's necklace and shoe strap. Prosecutor Aaron Walsh reviewed the file and stated briefly, "This is the strongest chain of DNA evidence I've seen in a cold case. No scientific doubt." The arrest warrant for Daniel Mercer was signed at 9:15 p.m. on June 17, 2024. Before execution, the cold case team held a brief review. Grant reminded everyone, "We're not just arresting a suspect, we're completing justice for the woman lost 45 years ago." Rachel Keene was silent, gazing at Eve's old photo placed on the table, her gentle eyes now a symbol of perseverance in the investigation. The next morning, the warrant was handed to enforcement in New Haven County. Police surrounded the small house where Mercer lived, waiting for him to leave for work. At 69, thin and gray-haired, he had just stepped out the door when ordered to stop. Upon reading the arrest warrant, Mercer did not resist, only shaking his head slightly. "I knew this day would come." That afternoon, in an NBC Connecticut broadcast, the anchor read, "After 45 years, Connecticut State Police have arrested 69-year-old Daniel Mercer on charges of murdering Evelyn Marston, the 1979 disappearance case that shocked Ridgefield. Forensic genetic genealogy technology identified the suspect with near-absolute accuracy." As the news spread across the state, Ridgefield residents stepped out to revisit the spot that was once Eve's small home on Branchville Road. A temporary memorial sign was erected by the wooden fence, with handwritten words, "Welcome home, Eve." At Hartford, the investigative team finalized the closing report before transferring the case to the prosecutor's office. On the cover page, Grant wrote the conclusion, "Forensic genetic and physical evidence identifies Daniel Mercer as the primary suspect. Match probability, 1 in 2.3 trillion. Full basis for first-degree murder prosecution." After nearly half a century, Connecticut's once unsolvable case finally found its resolution, thanks to the lingering DNA strands on a small necklace engraved with 2 initials. In April 2024, Nearly a month after the arrest warrant was signed, Connecticut State Police coordinated with the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office to conduct an operation to arrest Daniel Mercer in Florida, where he had moved to live at the end of 2023. Mercer was 69 years old at the time, working as a maintenance technician for a small company specializing in repairing yacht generators. He lived quietly in a mobile home park on the outskirts of Sarasota, using his real name, without hiding his identity at all. On the morning of April 12, at 7:10 a.m., two Connecticut agents, along with local police, approached the White House where Mercer was staying. When he opened the door, they read the arrest warrant issued by the Connecticut Supreme Court. Mercer did not react, only asking briefly, "Is that what this is about?" then holding out his hands in front to be cuffed. Around his neck he was still wearing a thin metal chain, its dull silver glint under the sun. At the Sarasota police station, Mercer had his DNA sample taken directly with a sealed swab. He agreed without objection. Throughout the short interrogation, he remained calm, neither admitting guilt nor denying his relationship with Evelyn Marston. "I once loved her," Mercer said, "but I didn't kill anyone." The DNA sample was sent by air to the Connecticut Forensic Science Laboratory that same night. Less than 24 hours later, the comparison results were sent back, a perfect match with the male DNA sequence obtained from the silver necklace and evidence at the scene. Probability of error, less than 1 in 2.3 trillion. The report stated, DNA match confirmed, Daniel Mercer identical source. When the results were read aloud in the Hartford meeting room, Lieutenant Rachel Keene only said, "That's it." Captain Grant nodded, ordering the extradition process for the suspect to be activated. The state prosecutor's office sent an official request to Florida. 4 days later, Mercer was escorted back to Connecticut on a special flight, hands cuffed, accompanied by 2 state officers. When the plane landed at Bradley International Airport, Mercer was taken directly to Hartford County Jail. Local media was already waiting, cameras following the police convoy as it passed. To reporters' questions, Grant only said briefly, "We have the DNA, we have the timeline, and now, we have the man who will be held accountable." On April 19, 2024, Daniel Mercer was officially charged with murder in the second degree under Connecticut state law. In the 8-page indictment, prosecutor Aaron Walsh detailed the chain of evidence, the matching male DNA sample, the 1978 Ford Econoline tire tracks, the timeline inconsistencies, and matching physical evidence at the scene. She declared, "This is an example of how science can overcome time. We're talking about justice for a woman who was robbed of her chance to live 45 years ago." At the preliminary hearing, Mercer only said a few words when asked, "Not guilty." He looked straight at the prosecution, his eyes empty. Jamie Marston, Eve's son, who was 57 years old by then, was present in the courtroom. He did not speak, only clutching a photo of his mother tightly. After the hearing, he told the press, "I don't need him to say anything. I just need to know the truth has been proven." Connecticut State Police announced they were still continuing to analyze additional subsidiary DNA samples from the scene to strengthen the prosecution file. But for the investigative team, the case was essentially closed. "We've tied up the loose end," Grant said in the final meeting. Hutchins, the one who started this in 1979, if he were still alive, he'd be smiling. After 45 years, Evelyn Marston's disappearance was finally closed with an arrest 1,300 miles from the scene. From a single strand of DNA, left on the silver necklace, justice had found its way, slowly, but never forgetting. Daniel Mercer's first interrogation took place on April 22, 2024, at the Connecticut State Police Headquarters in Hartford. The interrogation room was simply set up, a metal table, 3 chairs, a ceiling corner camera, and a one-way mirror where prosecutors observed. Lieutenant Rachel Keene and Agent Mark Heller were in charge of leading it. Mercer, 69 years old, sat across from them, hands on the table, wrists still marked from the cuffs. Beside him was his court-appointed public defender, Harold Kessler, who was mostly silent, mainly observing. Keene began in a calm tone. "Mr. Mercer, we will be recording and audio taping this entire session today. You have the right to remain silent, the right to request an attorney. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Mercer nodded, eyes looking down at the table, no other reaction. At first, Mercer denied everything. He said he didn't know why his DNA was on the evidence, suggesting it might be from past contact with Eve's belongings. "I used to fix her car, used to help her put on the necklace," he said, voice hoarse. "But I didn't kill her. I left her house that afternoon, when it was still light out." Keene quietly placed the file folder in front of him, opening to the first page, the DNA results printed in bold, identical source match, 1 in 2.3 trillion probability. Then she said, "This isn't an old trace, Mr. Mercer. This is skin cells stuck on the necklace clasp that the victim was wearing when she died. How do you explain your DNA being there, along with your prints on the flip-flop strap?" Mercer fell silent. Kessler lightly placed a hand on his client's shoulder, signaling not to speak, but Mercer's eyes had changed, confused, mixed with a bit of weariness. He sighed. "You still don't understand. I didn't mean to hurt her." Keene leaned forward. "Then tell us, what happened that night?" A long silence followed. Finally Mercer spoke softly, voice halting. "I went to her house that night, around 9. We argued on the porch. She wanted to end it. I couldn't accept that." According to Mercer, he had gone to Eve's house to talk one last time. She came out the back door, wearing a green sweater and flip-flops. They stood on the porch, cold wind and yellow light spilling out from the kitchen. Eve said she needed time, didn't want to continue. Mercer said he just wanted a few more minutes. When she turned away, he grabbed her arm, demanding she hear him out. Eve pulled away, stumbled, slipped on the wet step from the dew. She fell down, Mercer said, eyes staring fixedly. Her head hit the stone step. She didn't wake up. He paused, then added, "I panicked. I thought she was dead." Keene asked, "And instead of calling for help, what did you do?" Mercer clenched his hands. "I panicked. I was afraid of being blamed. I took her to the car." He confessed that he had dragged the body and Eve's trash bag that she was going to take out, placing them in the back compartment of his beige Ford Econoline van. Then he drove out of the Branchville area, along Route 7 to the abandoned dump site to the south, which used to be a public landfill. "I knew that spot," Mercer said. "I'd been there a few times to dump trash for the garage. I just wanted to hide her for a while. There, he dug a shallow hole with the shovel he carried in the car, placed Eve's body with the trash bag, covered it with dirt and leaves. I took off her silver necklace," he said. "I don't know why, maybe panic. Then I left." Keene kept her voice calm. "You say she fell. So why did you have to scrub the entire van floor with bleach?" Mercer bowed his head, not answering. Kessler interjected. "My client admits he acted wrongly after the incident, but that wasn't intentional murder." Keene placed another photo in front of him, a shot of Eve's skull showing a long fracture from severe trauma. "You know this injury doesn't look like a normal fall, right?" Mercer looked away. "I didn't hit her," he said softly. "She fell, and I was scared. I just wanted to cover it up." After 3 hours, the official statement was drawn up, signed by Mercer and attorney Kessler. He reaffirmed, "I didn't mean to harm Evelyn. It was an accident." When asked why he didn't report it or seek help, he said, "I was 25 then, stupid, afraid of losing everything. I thought if I said anything, no one would believe me." After the interrogation ended, Keene stepped out of the room. She and Grant looked at each other, both understanding that even if Mercer called it an accident, the act of hiding the body for 45 years was evidence of intentional crime. "He just confessed to everything himself," Grant said. "Now we just need to verify it in the field." The next day, the investigative team organized a verification of the statement at the scene with the attorney and cameras recording. Mercer, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, was brought back to Ridgefield after nearly half a century. When the car reached the dirt road leading to the old dump site south of Route 7, he was silent, only looking up at the trees that had grown tall where he had once buried the body. In front of the camera, Keene asked, "Is this where you buried Evelyn Marston?" Mercer nodded slowly. "Over there behind," he pointed, "near the scrap metal pile. I remember placing her next to the trash bag." The forensics team compared the location to the May 2024 excavation map, an exact match down to the meter. Every gesture of Mercer's was recorded as additional evidence for the prosecution file. After confirmation, he was taken back to the car, his face calm to the point of coldness. In the internal report sent to the state prosecutor, Keene wrote, "Suspect Daniel Mercer initially denied, then admitted to an argument, leading to the victim's death. Behavior of concealing the body and cleaning the vehicle shows clear criminal intent. Statement matches autopsy results and excavation location." Grant signed below, with a final note, "After 45 years, Eve Marston has finally heard the truth about the night she disappeared." In the sunset that day, as the convoy left Route 7, Keene looked in the rearview mirror and saw Mercer sitting in the back, hands on his lap, empty eyes directed toward the place where he had once buried the woman he had loved. All that remained in the space was the wind blowing through the forest, cold, long and silent, like the 45 years of waiting for Evelyn Marston's justice. 2 days after the crime scene reconstruction, the Connecticut State Forensics team returned to the dump site south of Route 7 to excavate and verify Daniel Mercer's statement. Under the direction of Dr. Carol Newen, the technical team set up protective fencing, marking the exact area that Mercer had pointed to during the field session. The low-lying plot of land, covered in weeds and young trees, was only a few meters from the location where Evelyn Marston's remains were discovered. When the first layer of soil was peeled back, the team found a few pieces of glass and metal mixed in the dirt, signs of the old dump. By late morning, at a depth of about 80 centimeters, a technician spotted a small round metal object. It was a metal shirt button still clinging to a thread of rotten green fabric. Under the microscope, the embossed pattern matched exactly with the button sample from the green sweater obtained in the initial excavation. Next to it, they also found a strand of light brown car matting, tightly woven polyester, matching the floor liner material on the 1978 Ford Econoline line. The exact vehicle Mercer had owned. The new evidence was sealed and sent to the Hartford lab. As the team continued digging, they uncovered a broken piece of cement with a brown streak, its structure and color matching the type of brick used on the back steps of Eve's house. Compared to the 1979 archived sample, the results confirmed both had the same chemical composition, originating from the Ridgefield building supply store. Dr. Newen noted at the scene, evidence matches suspect's statement on location and vehicle used to transport the body. The samples were scanned microscopically, and on the cement piece, they detected traces of calcification with collagen fiber tissue, indicating prior contact with human tissue. A week later, the official forensics report was released. The results showed that the fracture on Eve's skull aligned in direction and angle of impact with the back cement steps of the house. The crack extended from the forehead to the temple, characteristic of a hard fall onto a low flat surface, about 25–30 centimeters high, exactly the height of the step edge where Mercer said she slipped. No signs of a weapon or repeated trauma were found. The tiny cement particles embedded in Eve's skull tissue perfectly matched the home samples, reinforcing the hypothesis that the porch impact was the direct cause of death. The report concluded, head injury mechanism compatible with severe impact against cement steps. No evidence of repeated assault. Physical evidence confirms possibility of victim falling, death due to closed head trauma. When the appraisal was presented to prosecutor Erin Walsh, she noted, "These results bolster the statement, but the act of hiding the body and cleaning the vehicle demonstrates criminal intent." The prosecutor's office invited an independent panel of experts from Yale School of Medicine to review. They issued a similar conclusion. In a brief press conference, Lieutenant Rachel Keene declared, The physical evidence, shirt button, carpet fiber, cement fragment, all match the suspect's statement perfectly. Mercer cannot deny his involvement. Connecticut media ran the story that same day with the headline, "New evidence confirms suspect's statement in 1979 Ridgefield case." Upon hearing the news, Mercer in Hartford jail only remained silent. When his attorney asked if he wanted to contest it, he replied, "No, I told it just as it happened. She fell. I panicked." The investigative team's summary sent to the prosecutor's office stated clearly, excavation location matches suspect's description exactly. New evidence, shirt button, carpet fiber, cement fragment, matches archive samples. Forensics results determined death mechanism consistent with a fall on the porch. Lieutenant Keene wrote in the report's final line, "Daniel Mercer's statement is confirmed by independent physical evidence. After 45 years, the mechanism of death and body disposal location for Evelyn Marston have been proven to match the suspect's confession." As the forensics team dismantled the tent and left Route 7 that day, the afternoon light fell on the freshly excavated plot, a place silent for 4 decades. Beneath the old soil, the last remaining fragments of evidence had finally spoken, confirming the story that the woman named Evelyn Marston never got to tell. In early May 2024, after nearly 2 months of analysis and verification, the Connecticut State Investigative Team completed the entire technical file on the Evelyn Marston case, officially titled Chain of Evidence Report, Case RMCCU 2024-118. This was the most comprehensive forensic compilation the unit had ever prepared for a cold case, comprising over 600 pages of documents, 143 crime scene photographs, 78 items of evidence, and 22 DNA comparison reports. Lieutenant Rachel Keene, who oversaw the compilation, opened the internal briefing at Hartford. On the large screen was a diagram of the evidence chain from the night of the disappearance on October 19, 1979, to the arrest of Daniel Mercer in April 2024. Arrows connected each link between old data and new forensic results. "We've proven the entire path of the evidence across 4 decades, Keene said. Not just legally, but scientifically. DNA on the silver necklace. The first key section was the male DNA sample discovered under the clasp of the necklace engraved, EM. The initial evidence confirming direct contact between Mercer and the victim at the time of death. Full genetic analysis showed the DNA sequence matched Mercer's sample exactly, with a margin of error of 1 in 2.3 trillion. The epidermal cell structure and sebum layer proved the sample could not have survived more than a few hours before burial, meaning it was the final contact trace before Eve's death. Evidence related to the vehicle, carpet fibers and van paint. During the April excavation, technicians found light brown car carpet fibers adhered to the soil layer around the body. Comparison of the synthetic polyester fibers with the Ford vehicle production database revealed a match to the standard floor mat fibers in the 1978 Ford Econoline, the model registered to Daniel Mercer. Additionally, during scanning of soil samples from Eve's hair, the forensics team detected light beige paint particles under electron microscopy. Spectral analysis identified the paint layer as consisting of 3 coats: gray primer, beige base coat, and polymer varnish. A rare structure found only on Ford commercial vehicles produced from June to December 1978. The report stated clearly, the paint particles and carpet fibers recovered at the scene are an absolute match to the materials used in the 1978 Ford Econoline. The results reinforce the hypothesis that the victim was transported by Daniel Mercer's vehicle. Timeline of travel and inconsistencies in statements based on Mercer's old phone records. The digital team digitized the 1979 analog logs. A 53-second call was made from Mercer's home number to Eve's at 9:42 p.m., matching the time neighbors heard a car start. The Connecticut State Historical Weather System indicated light rain at 9:20 that night, making the ground damp, the reason the tire tracks were imprinted clearly behind Eve's house. By simulating the route from her home to the Route 7 landfill using mapping software, the team determined a travel time of about 17 minutes, a perfect match to Mercer's interrogation estimate that he left and returned home around 10 o'clock. The report also highlighted the alignment between the garage departure time around 8:30 p.m., per coworkers, and the 9:42 p.m. mark, confirming Mercer had sufficient time to reach Eve's house, the conflict to occur, and the body to be transported. Evidence from the victim's home scene, the red fabric fiber collected from the porch steps in 1979, was retested using touch DNA technology, revealing Mercer's DNA on the polyester fiber. The results reinforced that he was present at the outdoor scene on the porch, consistent with his statement about the argument. Additionally, the human tissue-adhered cement fragment found in the new excavation matched the composition of the steps, confirming the death mechanism as a fall impact against a hard surface. Evidence preservation chain of custody to ensure legality. Keene presented the custody chain from 1979 to the present. Each item of evidence, from the trash bag, left shoe, to the silver necklace, was sealed in specialized paper bags, labeled RM791019, and stored in the cold vault of the Connecticut State Police Evidence Facility. Periodic inspection logs and storage box photographs were attached in the appendix, proving the evidence had not been altered. No links were broken, Keene affirmed. The perfect chain of custody makes the evidence admissible in court. Synthesis of evidence and legal assessment. The report concluded with 4 main elements forming a complete forensic evidence chain. Direct contact DNA necklace, red fabric fiber, shoe strap, transportation vehicle, carpet fibers, van paint, matching tire tracks. Space-time 9:42 p.m. Mark, Route 7 route, Southern landfill. Corroborated statements, burial location, step description, vehicle cleaning behavior. Prosecutor Aaron Walsh reviewed the report in a meeting with the investigative team. When reaching the conclusion section, she simply said, "We have it all." A closed logical chain, from DNA to time and place. She then signed to acknowledge receipt of the file, officially advancing the case to the prosecution phase. On May 10, 2024, the Connecticut State Prosecutor's Office issued a press release, "Scientific evidence is fully corroborated, including confirmatory DNA, vehicle matching physical evidence, and a valid chain of custody." Pursuant to Section 53A-54 of the Connecticut Penal Code, Daniel Mercer is indicted on the charge of murder in the second degree. Major newspapers like the Hartford Courant and New Haven Register ran the story simultaneously. Complete evidence chain leads to indictment in 1979 Ridgefield case. In the internal report sent to the State Department of Justice, the final line written by Rachel Keene read, "After 45 years, fragments of evidence once thought silent, have now come together into a unified story." Scientific evidence, not statements, is Evelyn Marston's final witness. As night fell over Hartford, the chain of evidence file was placed in a metal cabinet, marked with a red stamp, for trial. The case had come full circle, from the small necklace engraved EM, to a complete evidence chain, ready to enter the Connecticut State courtroom, where justice was finally prepared to speak. In early summer 2024, with the entire forensic evidence chain established, the Connecticut State investigative team entered the final phase before prosecution: crime scene reconstruction and comprehensive analysis. Their goal was to recreate the fall night of 1979, the night Evelyn Marston disappeared, using everything modern science could achieve. Lieutenant Rachel Keene said in the first meeting, "We'll rebuild every minute, every footstep, so there's no room left for the truth to hide." The criminal technical team collaborated with the Connecticut Institute of Technology to use reality capture 3D software to recreate Evelyn's entire 2-story wooden house on Branchville Road. Back door, cement steps, trash bin maple fence, and the Southern Route 7 landfill area. Based on 1979 black and white crime scene photos, cadastral maps, and current satellite data, they restored every detail accurately. The lighting software simulated that night's weather conditions: light northeast wind, thin mist, waning gibbous moonlight filtering through the tree line. In the 3D model, the kitchen light only illuminated a few meters around the porch, while the backyard sank into darkness. When the simulation ran, the image emerged clearly. Evelyn steps into the yard, trash bag in hand. Mercer appears from the fence side. The two exchange briefly, then words escalate. Evelyn turns to go back inside, but he grabs her arm, and in a moment of lost balance, she slips and falls, hitting her head on the cement steps. The impact angle matched exactly the skull fracture direction noted in the old autopsy report. Carol Newen, head of the forensics team, concluded the fall was the direct cause of death, but all subsequent actions show clear intent to conceal the crime. Based on old data and physical evidence, the investigative team reconstructed the entire chain of events in that fateful half hour. Evelyn goes out to take out the trash. Mercer arrives, parks at the fence. The two argue. The fall occurs, and soon after, he drags the body with the trash bag to the vehicle. The drag mark, nearly 2 meters long, matched the old crime scene photos. Afterward, Mercer transports the body to the southern Route 7 landfill, a trip taking less than 20 minutes, then returns home, washes the vehicle, and cleans all traces. His brief call to Evelyn's number right after was deemed an attempt to check if anyone had noticed the incident. Microclimate reconstruction methods, pollen analysis, soil humidity, and temperature pinpointed the time of death within that evening's time frame, fully aligning with weather data and statements. Every piece of evidence was mapped onto the 3D model, the left shoe lying offset to the west of the steps, the torn trash bag next to the drag mark, clear Goodyear, suburbanite tire impressions in the ground, vehicle carpet fibers and paint particles in the victim's hair, matching Mercer's Ford Econoline. The report affirmed these traces could only appear if the body was placed in the vehicle's rear compartment. By mid-July, all data was compiled into the over 250-page event reconstruction and timeline report, attached with 3D simulation video and event charts. When Rachel Keene presented it to prosecutor Aaron Walsh, she said just one sentence: "There's no room left for doubt." In early August 2024, the prosecutor's office formally filed charges against Daniel Mercer for murder in the second degree. The trial opened at Danbury Superior Court, drawing media attention across the state. In the front row sat Jamie Marston, Evelyn's only son, quietly holding a photo of his mother. Prosecutor Aaron Walsh opened with a short but firm statement: "Justice may be slow, but it never loses the trail. A woman died, and 45 years later, the truth has finally been found." The defense, attorney Harold Kessler, argued it was merely an accident, and Mercer panicked out of fear of being charged. But the prosecution countered with scientific evidence. Crime scene maps, simulation videos, photometragraphs, and DNA chains were projected in court. Newen pointed to magnified images. Mercer's epidermal cells adhered to the necklace and red fabric fiber, proving he was present when the victim died. No possibility of cross-contamination. When the fall simulation played, the courtroom fell silent, the impact sound echoing clearly. The prosecutor asked, if it was just an accident, why did he wash the vehicle clean, erase traces, and bury the body? The defense fell silent. At the trial's end, Mercer was allowed to testify. Wearing a blue shirt, his voice trembling, "I didn't mean to. She fell, and I was scared. I thought no one would believe me." The prosecutor countered, "Did you know you killed her chance to be saved?" He bowed his head, replying softly, "I knew." Jamie Marston stood, tears streaming. He left the courtroom without a word, clutching his mother's photo tightly. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks, with over 20 witnesses and experts called. In early September 2024, after hours of deliberation, the jury found Daniel Mercer guilty of murder in the second degree. Judge Helen Driscoll sentenced, the defendant is sentenced to 40 years imprisonment, no parole for the first 25 years. Though the death began as an accident, the concealment and disposal actions show clear criminal intent. Mercer said nothing, only looking down at his trembling hands. The press ran the story en masse. 45 years after Ridgefield disappearance, justice served. After the trial, the Connecticut State Police released a summary file, the Marston case. 45 years to justice, becoming a teaching document at the State Forensics Academy, a model investigation on applying DNA, genetic genealogy, and 3D scene simulation in cold cases. In the press conference, Captain Lewis Grant said, "No evidence is truly silent, it just waits until science is strong enough to listen." At the Ridgefield Library, where Evelyn once worked, residents erected a memorial plaque inscribed, Evelyn Marston, 1946-1979. Justice found, never forgotten. On October 21, 2024, exactly 45 years after the fateful night, the case file was permanently archived at the State Police Repository with a red stamp, "Case closed." Justice delivered. That evening, Rachel Keene stepped out of the office, pausing before Eve's photo on the hallway wall, a gentle smile, bright eyes. She whispered softly, "Evelyn, we did it." Outside, light rain fell on Branchville Road, golden streetlights, casting down on the cement steps where it all began. After 45 years, the place was finally at peace. After the trial concluded, and Daniel Mercer was sentenced to 40 years in prison, Ridgefield, the quiet town where the case began, fell into a silent shock wave. Residents couldn't believe that for 45 years, the man who took Evelyn Marston's life had lived among them, walking familiar streets, greeting neighbors with a calm face. News of the verdict spread quickly, leaving a mix of shock and a sense of release. Some older folks recounted how they'd joined the 1979 search, never forgetting that night, and now could finally breathe easy. Major state newspapers like the Hartford Courant and New Haven Register ran front-page headlines. Justice returns to Ridgefield. NBC and CBS devoted special segments to the case, calling it a DNA-era story. Reporters described tracking the perpetrator through genetic genealogy as a miracle of science and human perseverance. Lieutenant Rachel Keene, who led the investigation, became an icon of the new generation of detectives, blending intuition with technology. In a brief interview, she only said, "We didn't win by luck. We just didn't give up." Soon after, the Connecticut State Police released the entire case file as a training document, titled, The Marston Case. 45 years to justice. The file included the evidence chain, evidence preservation procedures, GED match database techniques, and 3D scene reconstruction models. It was quickly incorporated into teaching at forensics academies nationwide, becoming a prime example of forensic genealogy, investigative genetic genealogy. In cold case solving, Captain Lewis Grant stated at the launch, "Technology is just a tool." What truly brought this case to a close was the belief that truth still exists, even if forgotten. The Ridgefield community was still reeling. Some residents said they'd seen Mercer at local events, even asked him to fix their cars. No one thought he carried a secret that horrific, one neighbor shared. Meanwhile, Ridgefield High School, where Evelyn's son once studied, held a memorial. Students read an excerpt from her diary, "Nothing is more frightening than being forgotten." As the ceremony ended, the principal said, "Now she will never be forgotten again." The Marston family chose silence. Jamie, now over 50, only sent a thank you letter to the investigative team. "Thank you for not giving up. Because of you my mother was found. I believe in justice, as she believed in kindness." The letter was framed and hung in the cold case unit office, as a reminder to every investigator of why they do this work. National and international media, along with true crime channels, quickly covered the case. Dateline NBC and Cold Case Files produced special episodes, while Netflix announced a documentary project, Branchville, The 45-Year Secret. Experts called the Marston case a turning point for forensic genealogy in America, on par with the Golden State Killer's impact. From this case, Connecticut established the Evelyn Marston Grant Fund, named for the victim and Captain Grant, to provide financial support for cold case investigations and state-level DNA database development. At the fund's launch, the governor stated, "Evelyn Marston was not just a victim, she is the reason we never give up on answers." Part of the fund's budget was allocated to train young investigators in long-term evidence preservation and analysis, a direct legacy of this case. In Ridgefield, residents erected a small memorial plaque in front of the library where Evelyn worked, inscribed, "Evelyn Marston, 1946-1979. Justice found, never forgotten." Each year, in late October, when maple leaves turn red, residents gather to lay flowers, light candles, and retell the story to students about a quiet woman, a case thought lost to time, and the people who spent nearly half a century bringing justice back. In the Hartford Cold Case Unit office, on the hallway hung photos of solved cases, Evelyn's in the center. Below, a small line etched in bright steel, 45 years to justice, solved by truth, preserved by time. Rachel Keene still worked for the unit. In an interview, she said, "We didn't close this case, Evelyn did. She left the traces, and we just learned to listen." When asked about her final emotion, she smiled, "Justice may sleep, but it never dies." In the story of Evelyn Marston, justice doesn't come from a single twist, but from a series of very ordinary details: neighbors hearing a metallic sound, but not seeing clearly; the left slipper lying 1.3 meters off on the doorstep; a short call shortly after from Mercer's number, carpet fiber; and Ford Econoline paint chips stuck in the hair; the EM necklace preserving touch DNA for 45 years, thanks to proper preservation. With life in the United States today, those details remind us of a few very practical things. First, value the small signs: unusual noises, back door ajar, a family member taking out the trash, but not returning. That's when to call 911 for a welfare check, rather than handling it yourself or waiting. Second, in personal relationships, an argument on the porch, leading to tragedy, shows the thin line between conflict and violence. If an ex can't accept the end, save messages, share your schedule with friends, turn on outdoor lights, camera doorbells, and proactively seek a protection order if needed. Third, don't clean up the scene. In the U.S., trying to wipe or move objects can destroy evidence and turn an accident into a crime. Calling emergency services is always the right path. Fourth, the community has a role. Dolores Dolan's testimony, the dedication of search volunteers, the Evelyn Marston Grant Fund for cold cases, that's how citizens support the justice system. Join Neighborhood Watch. Voluntarily donate DNA GDT-Com samples, according to regulations. Support investigator training. Finally, respect the process from chain of custody to 3D simulations, reminds us that truth requires time and discipline. The lingering lesson is just like the proverb engraved at the Ridgefield Library: justice may sleep, but it never dies. Thank you for joining us in following the 45-year justice journey of the Evelyn Marston case. Proof that the truth may be buried, but it never disappears. Please subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying us in the next true crime stories, where justice, even if late, always finds its way back.